He has showed us his photos and told us about his travels in China, about the Silk Road, about his year in Albania. Tonight he will introduce us to India. Barry Pell is a world traveler and photojournalist. He's traveled widely over the past 40 years, visiting and documenting landscapes and cultures in 157 countries. Mr. Pell also lived and traveled in China for 2 years and in Eastern Europe for 1 year. He currently lectures on international cultures at schools, universities, and institutions in the Boston area. Please welcome Barry Pell.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me back to the Jenks Center to give another of my international culture and photography programs. Tonight's program is on India, and it is entitled Tradition and Modernity Collide on the Subcontinent. India has over 1.2 billion people. It's the second most populated country on Earth. And that's after China. China is presently the most populated, but India is actually forecast in the next couple of years, or perhaps a decade, to overtake China and become the world's most populated country. India is considered one of the world's 4 emerging economic giants, together with Brazil, Russia, and China, referred to as the BRIC, or B-R-I-C, countries. And of course, it is a very strategically important country, wedged between China and the Middle East. It is one of a couple of handfuls of countries that have atomic weapons. And its neighbor, Pakistan, also has atomic weapons, which has created the potential for severe problems, especially since these two countries do not get along with each other, and there has been an ongoing dispute with Pakistan over India's northern province of Kashmir. India does have a very close relationship with the United States. However, it is also our economic competitor, as anyone knows who has recently called their local customer service representative and gotten a voice from faraway India in perhaps a dialect that they didn't quite understand. American companies have offices and businesses in India, but also many American jobs have been outsourced to India because of cheaper labor on the subcontinent. I've traveled throughout India within the past few years. This program will reflect my observations and my impressions. India certainly presents a fascinating mix of ancient culture and cutting-edge technology. It amazes the visitor with its diverse cultures of many dozens of different ethnic groups. This program will show how India's history evolved to coalesce these groups into what is today a united democracy. So if we can get the lights and one more? Yep. Great. All right. Well, as we look at these very beautifully adorned Indian women, with one foot deeply grounded in time-honored traditions and the other fervently striding into the computer age, India embraces diversity like no other country on earth. It is home to an amazingly varied population of some 1.2 billion people. It is truly a land of astonishing contrasts, as sublime as it is squalid with flat and featureless plains, but also with the towering and spectacular Himalaya mountains in the north, and with religious texts and ceremonies that are as perplexing as their underlying message is simple. More than any other country that I've previously traveled, India is a place to expect the unexpected. Whether it is I can't quite see from here. Is that in focus? No. Let's just make sure it is. Yes. is definitely a place to expect the unexpected, whether it is a woman boarding a train with her goat, or an enormous fresh air laundromat on a riverbank, or a stunningly beautiful island palace hotel situated on a lake. India is not a country you merely see. It is an invigorating assault on all senses. And like most travelers I met, I seesawed between loving it and hating it, sometimes at the same time, often taking refuge for a fresh fruit or delicious lassi yogurt drink, which is a specialty of South India, or a meal or a snack from one of the many open-air restaurants. Here is, I thought it would be interesting to read a short passage from my journal. It was late afternoon, and I continued walking for a while. It was an intense Indian scene. Navigating myself along the street required sidestepping the huge, firmly planted cows, some walking goats, dogs, and pigs, trying to ignore the rickshaw drivers incessantly calling hello to persuade me to hire them, circumventing piles of garbage, the air caked with diesel exhaust fumes, the noise of Indians yelling, motor rickshaw, vehicle horns, and bells from bicycles, and the occasional moo bellow from a frustrated cow. Yet, there were also the appealing-looking and mouth-watering smells from the itinerant food carts, serving a variety of tasty nuts, and lentils, and fried vegetable-filled samosas. And there were also the fragrant scents from the small glass bottles of the perfume seller. India, unmistakably, is a unique travel destination and a place I can never forget. Now, it was Nehru, the country's first prime minister, who called India, which is depicted here in a stone mural proudly assembled by school children, he called India a bundle of contradictions held together by strong but invisible threads. Indeed, India's history has encompassed an epic suite of great civilizations, invasions, the birth of religions, and countless upheavals. We know India today as a unified nation, an area slightly larger than 1/3 of the United States. But in fact, this has only been true in recent centuries. The early history of the subcontinent was marked by empires that, at best, consolidated regional control. This pattern of divided history and partial rule occurred principally between the North and the South, and consequently, it is the peoples, their cultures, their religious predominance that vary significantly between North and South India today. India's current 28 states represent nearly as many different cultures, customs, and languages. Now, India's early history was known as the Harappan civilization. It began in the Indus Valley in the northwest part of the subcontinent along today's India-Pakistan border about 6,000 years ago. The Hindu sacred scriptures, called the Vedas, were written in 1500 BC, and the caste system of social classes, which I'll talk about in a moment, was also formalized at this time. This dancing figure of the Hindu religion is the goddess Nataraja, expressing the rhythm and harmony of life. And two other important religions, Buddhism, these are Buddhist prayer flags, and Jainism, which I'll also mention in a few minutes, arose later, around 500 BC, in part as a reaction against the strict caste conservatism of Hinduism. The first great Indian empire encompassed much of India. Its peak was around the 3rd century BC. And during this time, Buddhism was pronounced as the state religion. Meanwhile, while this was happening in the north, the south of India was undergoing its own unique history. It was insulated by distance from the political developments in the north, and a separate set of powerful kingdoms emerged. South India, of course, being narrower, has excellent ports on both sides of the Indian Ocean coast, and it became prosperous by trading with spices, pearls, ivory, and silk with first the Romans and Egyptians to the west, and with Southeast Asia to the east. The ruling empires of the South built the stunning and distinctive Indian, known as Dravidian, architecture characteristic of Hindu temples. And Hinduism became the dominant religion of South Indian culture. While South India was consolidating its Hindu character, North India was being invaded by Muslim armies from Afghanistan, and they brought with them Islamic culture, architecture, and religion. Between the 11th and 14th centuries, Muslim sultanates took hold over North India, and this, as you would expect, set up an inevitable clash with the Hindu kingdoms of the South. Perhaps the most significant influence on Indian culture was the Mughal Empire, which reigned between the 16th and 18th century. The Mughals extended over nearly all the subcontinent. This was India's golden age of arts, literature, and architecture. In particular, the Mughal Empire Shah Jahan, during this time, built the Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal means crowning palace. And he built this during his rule as a memorial for his second wife, who died giving childbirth to their 14th child in 1631. To build the Taj Mahal, specialists were brought in from as far afield as Europe to produce the exquisite marble screens and marble inlay work made with thousands of semi-precious stones. Many people have tried to describe the beauty of the Taj Mahal. The famous Indian poet Tagore called it a teardrop on the face of eternity. Rudyard Kipling said it was the embodiment of all things pure. I certainly agree with these characterizations, and I felt that not only was visiting the Taj Mahal the most impressive experience of my trips to India, but it is also among the top sites of all my travels. The first Europeans to arrive in India were the Portuguese, and in 1498, Vasco da Gama arrived on the southwest coast, the modern-day state of Kerala, having sailed around Africa. Pioneering this route gave the Portuguese a century of monopoly over Indian trade with Europe. But the Portuguese really did not have the resources to maintain a worldwide empire, and they were soon eclipsed by the arrival of the British and the French. And this is an example of British colonial architecture in present-day Delhi. At the beginning of the 17th century, British Queen Elizabeth I granted a charter to a private London trading company called the East India Company to establish a monopoly on British trade with India. And this is a modern-day market, looking quite Indian and crowded, and probably as crammed with goods and crammed for space as it was during the British colonial period. The French also had commercial trading aspirations in India, and they established a base on the east coast in the town of Pondicherry in the mid-17th century. And it appeared for a time that France and England would come to blows over the India trade. However, the French East India Company concluded that business was inadequate, and by 1750, they left and made a settlement with the British. But the French influence still remains today in the charming French-cultured city of Pondicherry, with its colonial stucco homes and fine French restaurants. The mid-1700s to mid-1800s was a period of conflict and warfare between the Mughal leaders and the expanding British control. The British established a new trading base at Calcutta and expanded others. By the early 19th century, India was effectively under British control, and this was referred to as the British Raj. This is the fort in Delhi, known as the Red Fort because of its obvious red sandstone color. It was built by the Mughals, but it became the major defensive center of the British during the Raj. The British government, once in control, began to take a more direct role in supervising the affairs of India. Trade and profit continued to be their main focus, and they did iron and coal mining were developed, as well as tea, depicted here in a tea bush plantation on the west side of the country, as well as cultivating coffee and cotton. The British at this time also built the vast rail network, which is still in use in the country. This is Victoria Station in the city of Mumbai, formerly Bombay. Now it takes an Indian name. It's no longer called Victoria Station. It looks, however, a little bit like the British built it, as a Gothic palace with turrets, spires, and stained glass windows, hardly looking like a train station. The English language was also imposed at this time, although it was useful to unify communication in a country with so many different languages. It also kept the new British rulers at arm's length from the Indian populace, most of whom did not know this new language. The beginning of the Indian independence movement is dated to 1857 with a rebellion by the army. And so began nearly 100 years of demonstrations, skirmishes, and bloody battles, including atrocities committed on both the Indian and British sides, as well as between the Muslims and the Hindu populations in the wrenching and often heartbreaking road to India's independence. And out of this turmoil, during this independence fight, a new set of Indian leaders emerged, led by a young attorney named Mohandas Gandhi. And Gandhi soon became the spokesman for the Indian independence movement and championed equality for all. His philosophy of nonviolent protest, his support for the rights of the lowest caste untouchables class, and his imprisonments and hunger strikes, which often put Gandhi on the verge of death to publicize his goals, are well known. His steadfast persistence in his beliefs and his willingness to sustain great personal sacrifice earned him the title of Mahatma, which means great soul. He is commemorated throughout India with statues, memorials, and museums about his life. And so independence came to India at the stroke of midnight on August 15, 1947, and this supposedly should have been a very joyous time. But what immediately followed was widespread civil violence. Frictions had been building between Muslims and Hindus for political control of the newly independent nation. And in a Solomon-like judgment, it was decided to divide, this was called partition, British India into two countries. India would contain predominantly Hindu populations, and Pakistan would have the Muslim populations. But the decision of where the dividing line should be drawn proved almost impossible. Although some areas were clearly dominated by Muslims or Hindus, others had evenly mixed populations. Moreover, the two overwhelmingly Muslim regions were on opposite sides of the country, and therefore Pakistan would inevitably have an eastern and western half separated by 1,000 miles of a hostile India in between. Eventually, in 1971, East Pakistan became the independent country of Bangladesh. And so partition resulted in an epic disaster, as millions of Hindus and Muslims began a mass population exchange across the new borders. Trains full of Muslims fleeing westward were held up and slaughtered by Hindu mobs. Hindus fleeing to the east suffered the same fate. And by the time this chaos had ended, more than 10 million people had changed sides, and at least 500,000 people had been killed. Now, during this horrible period, Gandhi stood almost alone in urging tolerance and the preservation of a single India. His work on behalf of members of all communities inevitably drew resentment from both sides, and especially from some Hindu extremists. And on his way to evening prayer in January of 1948, Gandhi was assassinated by a Hindu zealot. His ashes were placed on this spot at the southern tip of India before immersion in the Ganges River. Now, in my travels around India recently, I observed many, in fact, most cities and towns where Hindu and Muslim groups live peacefully, side by side. Neighborhoods, however, are not typically mixed, and it's very easy to identify which is which. In the Muslim areas, by the men with woven skull caps, the markets absent of forbidden pig products, and the presence of handsome, minaret-sided Islamic prayer mosques. In the Hindu areas, of course, by the occasional cows roaming the street, which are sacred, and the highly ornate facades of Hindu temples. Yet, despite the general peaceful coexistence of these groups today, sporadic violence still occurs, ostensibly based on religious differences, but I believe grounded more in conflict over economic opportunities and differences in living standards. Now, one of the first things I noticed about India is how everyday life is intertwined with the spiritual. It would be impossible to speak about India without some discussion of religion. In fact, a lot of discussion about religion. Hindu people on their way to work or errands will unfailingly stop at small shrines along the road to perform a prayer called puja. Strings of colorful puja flowers, which are often carnations, are for sale in markets and in street kiosks. Puja flowers are used as hair adornments as well, and the remains at the end of the day usually are discarded on the street, but somehow find their way back into the food chain. At some time during each day, and especially during Hindu holidays, which seem to be nearly every week, men and women will briefly visit their local temple for a more formal puja observance, where the temple priest will bless them and rub some powder called kumkum. Here it is for sale at a mosque, very vibrant. They'll mark this on their forehead, making a mark called a bindi or a tika. Sometimes it is a line, sometimes just a dot. A vertical reddish powder line above a woman's forehead signifies that she is married. Animals are an important and sacred part of Hindu religious lore and tradition. In particular, elephants are sacred animals, and their elevated standing in Indian culture prevents them from being killed, even when they bring destruction to people and property. The elephant is considered to be the living incarnation of one of the Hindus' most important gods, called Ganesh. Now, there are literally thousands of gods in the Hindu pantheon, and explaining their interrelationships and symbolism would take many of these lectures. But as an example, I think it is interesting to describe a little about this perhaps most beloved god. Ganesh, with Ganesh shown here, Hindus invoke the elephant god's name at the beginning of worship, at the beginning of trips and projects. Ganesh statues, as shown here, are often of a happy, satisfied elephant with a large belly, and they can be found all over India, especially in the more Hindu-dominated south. According to Hindu scholars, each part of the deity has a symbolic function. Ganesh's head itself symbolizes the ability to acquire wisdom and knowledge. His big ears bestow the patience to listen carefully. His small eyes can behold the future and recognize truth, while his long trunk is able to sniff out good and evil. His big belly symbolizes the ability to digest both the best and worst of life. Many Hindu temples, especially in South India, have an elephant, a live one, that is brought to the temple every day. And the elephant, where physically possible, will be led inside to make a circuit around the temple's interior, perhaps stopping to commune with the Ganesh statues positioned within it. And then the elephant will be stationed outside to offer blessings to the faithful with its trunk. The elephant's caretaker is called a mahout and will very lovingly tend to the animal, as I observed in a 4-hour washing process at the river's edge one early morning. And by the way, you might be interested to know why cows are considered sacred in the Hindu religion. The cow is symbolic of abundance and the sanctity of life. Most Hindus respect the cow as a matriarchal figure for its gentle qualities and for providing nurturing milk, and its products for what is largely a vegetarian diet. It holds an honored place in society, and it is part of Hindu tradition to avoid the consumption of beef. India was the birthplace of the Hindu religion about 1500 BC. Hindus believe that earthly life is cyclical. You are born again and again, and the quality of these rebirths are dependent upon your karma, that is, your conduct or action in previous lives. Living a righteous life will enhance your chances of being born into a higher caste and better circumstances. But India is a land of many, many religions in addition to the predominant Hindu religion. The second major religion in India is Islam, which is practiced by about 12% of the population. In most cities and towns across the country, there are Muslim neighborhoods with some beautiful mosques. And certain cities like Hyderabad in the middle of the country have a predominant Muslim population and distinctive Muslim culture. These Muslim boys are on their way to school. And then there is Buddhism, which arose in the 6th century BC as a reaction against the conservative nature of Hinduism. The Buddha was an actual historical figure. Buddha means awakened one, and he lived between the 6th and 5th century BC. I am just going to change the slides. Okay, so as a young man, the Buddha embarked on a quest for enlightenment, which he achieved in the village of Bodh Gaya in North India, under a very famous tree. This is a ginkgo tree. And today this tree is actually a shrine in the Buddhist religion. And people from all over India and the world come to pray, hoping to catch a leaf that might blow down from this historic tree, and to attend ceremonies at the adjacent temple. Buddhism has some beliefs that are similar to Hinduism in India. And although less than 1% of India's population is today Buddhist, it has had a small revival, particularly due to the number of refugees who have crossed over from Chinese-controlled Tibet and have established their Indian base, led by the Dalai Lama in the north of India at Dharamsala. And then there is the religion of Jainism, which also started around the 6th century BC as a reaction against the caste system of Hinduism. And there are some very beautiful Jain temples in the country, including this marble structure of over 1,400 pillars, no two of which are carved the same. The Jain faith, interestingly, never extended beyond the boundaries of India. There are also Sikhs, very recognizable, a small but important religious group in India, predominantly in the northern state of Punjab. Sikhs believe in one God, unlike Hindus, but like Hindus, they believe in rebirth based on your actions. And the Punjab is one of the most fertile and affluent regions of India, and there are many Sikhs who believe that at partition, they too should have received their own country. Christianity also exists in India. It arrived first with Indian and Syrian merchants in the 4th century who practiced the Eastern Orthodox religion, but then Catholicism arrived with Portuguese explorers and later missionaries. But, as I say, Hinduism is the predominant religion. What I want to do is just say a few words about some of the most important ceremonies and traditions of this dominant religion. Certainly marriage is the most important event for Indians, and although love marriages have risen in recent years, most Hindu marriages are still arranged. A wedding usually entails a series of ceremonies occurring over a period of days, even weeks. Many of these occasions begin with a parade through the streets by the families, accompanied by music and stopping at various temples and shrines for observances and ceremonies. And at all these events, women, of course, wear their finest gowns, saris, and jewelry, as well as adorning their hands and feet with intricate decorations made from henna dye. In the ceremony that I attended, the bridal couple pledged their support to each other symbolically, with the man giving his wife a handful of coins to show that he will work for her, and the woman offering a portion of rice showing that she will feed him. Somewhat traditional roles. The birth of a child is another momentous occasion in Hinduism, with its own set of special circumstances which take place at various auspicious times during the early years of childhood. And these include the casting of the child's first horoscope, name-giving, the first feeding of solid food, and, as shown in this photo, the first haircutting. The Ganges is the most famous river in India. Beginning in the central Himalayas in the north of the country, it travels east and south for nearly 1,600 miles and drains into the east side of the country, the Bay of Bengal. It then fans out into a vast 220-mile wide delta, which is the world's largest, and which it shares with Bangladesh. This area is known as the Sundarbans, and it is home to one of the largest tiger populations left on Earth. These are the Royal Bengal tigers. They not only lurk in the impenetrable depths of the mangrove forest, but also swim the deltas, innumerable currents. They're known to have an appetite for humans, but fortunately they are not spotted very often. Even without spotting a tiger, however, I saw the recent presence of tiger footprints on this mud as I traveled down one of the channels. And outside of tigers, there are also lots of opportunities to see other wildlife that inhabit the delta. And it certainly was a very lovely experience, a serene opportunity away from the usual noise and crowds of frenetic India. According to Hindus, the Ganges River, which is also called Ganga, is sacred, and it is worshipped by Hindus and personified as a goddess. Hindu belief holds that bathing in the river, especially on certain occasions, causes the forgiveness of sins and helps to attain salvation. People travel from distant places to immerse the ashes of their kin in waters of the Ganges. And there are several places along the river that are particularly sacred, especially in the city of Varanasi. Varanasi had previously been called Benares, and it is one of the holiest cities in India. Hindu pilgrims come here from all over the country and the world to pray and wash away their sins. Varanasi has been a center of learning and civilization for over 2,000 years. The oldest part of the city is situated along the western bank of the Ganges and contains a series of wide, long stairways called ghats, which climb uphill to a labyrinth of narrow alleys and hundreds of small temples. And these ghats are a wonderful people-watching place. Most people who come to the Ganges do so not only for a ritual bath, but for any number of activities, including washing their clothes, doing yoga, offering blessings, getting a massage, selling flowers, playing cricket, even washing their buffalo. Or improving their karma by giving to beggars, or simply loitering. I did a lot of loitering and taking pictures. This is traditional India at its most colorful and picturesque. And mixed into these pilgrims, worshippers, and sightseers are the orange-robed Hindu holy men. These people are called sadhus, many of whom have renounced everything in life, all their possessions, including their clothing. Hindus cremate their dead, and funeral ceremonies are designed to purify and console both the living and the deceased. After cremation, the ashes are collected, and 13 days after the death, when blood relatives are deemed ritually pure, a member of the family usually scatters them in a holy river, such as the Ganges, or in the ocean. And in Varanasi, there are several ghats that are used for burning bodies in public. The way this works is that a measure of wood is purchased from a special vendor. It is carried down to the riverside platform. The deceased body is then arranged, wrapped in a shroud, and placed above the woodpile, which is then lit. The best time to visit these ghats and the river is at dawn, when it is enveloped in a mellow light. At this time, nearly 60,000 pilgrims come to bathe and perform puja to the morning rising sun. and also at sunset, when the main Ganga Arati ceremony, that is the chanting and singing of worship to the Ganges goddess, occurs. Now, although the Ganges River, or Great Mother, as it is known to Hindus, provides millions of Indians with an important link to their spirituality, it is also horribly polluted. Some 400 million people live along the basin of the Ganges River, and the pollution levels mean that waterborne diseases run rampant among many villages that use water from the river. Efforts have intensified in recent years to clean up the Ganges, but they are beset by government bureaucracy and corruption, as well as lack of funds. In the city of Allahabad, not far from Varanasi, there is a particularly sacred meeting point of the Ganges and another river. At this place, every 12 years, Hindu pilgrims in the tens of millions arrive for what is the largest religious congregation on earth, called the Kumbh Mela. During this event, a sea of tents is set up to house the pilgrims. Astrologers carefully pinpoint the auspicious time to take a holy dip, often a holy drink. And people carry sacred water from the river back home in sealed pots. The celebration doesn't belong to any particular caste or creed, and perhaps more than any single event, captures the huge mix of religious and cultural backgrounds that form the fabric of Indian society. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of the caste system in India, and it describes the social stratification and employment restrictions in which social classes are defined by thousands of lineage-based hereditary groups. Although generally identified with Hinduism, the caste system is also observed among followers of other religions in the Indian subcontinent, including some groups of Muslims and Christians. The Indian Constitution has outlawed caste-based discrimination in keeping with the secular democratic principles that founded the nation. Caste barriers have mostly broken down in the urban areas, but they still persist in rural parts of the country. Below the four main castes are the Dalits, otherwise known as the untouchables, who hold menial jobs such as sweepers and street cleaners. To improve their position, the government now reserves considerable numbers of public sector jobs, a kind of affirmative action program for this group. The commonly worn clothing by Indian women is the sari, which is made in a dazzling array of stylish colors and patterns. The sari is actually a single piece of cloth, ingeniously tucked and pleated in place without the need for pins or buttons. Bracelets come in equally dazzling colors. You know, there's so much to tell you about India, and I haven't even spoken about their music, their dance, their painting, or obsession with the game of cricket. I felt, by the way, that Indian people have a love-hate relationship with the British. On the one hand, they can recall with some bitterness the harsh treatment and inhuman violence perpetrated on their people during their fight for independence. On the other hand, it seemed obvious to me in my travels that the Indian people have passionately embraced some aspects of British culture, particularly the game of cricket. Here is a local boys' cricket team, as well as the necessary, obligatory break for afternoon tea, and even some element in their personality of a traditional British reserve. I will briefly mention, however, some aspects of Indian architecture, which has evolved into particularly magnificent forms in temple architecture. In the south of the country, of course, as I showed you before, are the soaring pyramidal gateway towers of Dravidian Hindu temples. The ornamentation and monumentalism of these temples were unheard of in the rest of the world when they were constructed in the 15th and 16th century. More ancient temples are embellished with exquisite stonework carvings that portray a storyboard of life from a millennium ago. Gods, goddesses, warriors, and musicians, and real and mythological animals, always sensual and often erotic. The fascinating temples of Bishnupur in the north, from the 16th to 19th centuries, contain detailed terracotta facades of scenes from the Hindu epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The mountainous terrain of Rajasthan in the west of India favored the construction of dramatic and strategic hilltop fortresses and palaces and walled cities. The vast sweep of Indian history seemed to me to offer an endless supply of incredible palaces, temples, and monuments. So finally, I'd like to finish by talking about what I feel from my travels are some of the major issues and challenges confronting India today. The first would have to be population. India has, as I mentioned, the world's second highest population after China. And with China's control of its population under its one-child policy, India will likely become the world's most populous nation within a decade. The overpopulation of India has placed enormous strains and burdens on all of the nation's services, from roads and infrastructure to doctors and hospitals, to schools. India's challenge will be to control its population and to lift at least 300 million people who now live in absolute poverty, surviving on less than $1 a day. The major causes of this poverty, of course, are illiteracy and a population growth rate that far exceeds the economic growth rate of the country. The wage earning contrasts in India are sharp. Many of the lowest paid occupations earn just over $1 a day. An Indian call center operator, those people you get when you call customer service, might earn $300 a month. And a young Indian middle manager working for an international company might earn $4,000 a month. Human rights groups believe that India currently has between 80 and 115 million child laborers. This is the highest rate in the world. The majority of these children work in the agricultural industry, while others work as rag pickers, household servants, carpet weavers, brick makers, and prostitutes. There are also significant numbers of children working in hazardous industries, including making cigarettes, chemicals, and fireworks manufacturing. And certainly, beyond the economic and social statistics of India's huge population, simply the crush of people in their daily lives, especially in the urban areas, detracts from the quality of life. Another of India's challenges is to overcome the dangers of rapid environmental degradation. At the human level, this is poisoning India's air and water, and at the global level, it is adding to climate change. Air pollution is also an ongoing environmental concern, with vehicular emissions being a major contributor, especially in urban areas. Pollution became so extreme around the Taj Mahal that it was actually eating away at the Taj Mahal, that finally a 2.5-mile area surrounding this national monument was designated a motor traffic-free zone in the mid-1990s. And noise pollution in major cities is often at least 1.5 times recommended levels. But probably the biggest environmental threat to public health, and by the way, I did notice in the south of India that they had, I was stunned to see this, but they had this wind generation project, these wind turbines, and this stood out mostly by its exception than its prevalence. The greatest issue environmentally for India is water and the inadequate access to clean drinking water and proper sanitation. And as I mentioned earlier, the Ganges is among the most polluted rivers in the country. Another of India's challenges, as it is in many nations of the developing world, is to head off the specter of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. India has the world's second highest number of HIV-positive cases after South Africa. And, of course, as I alluded in the introduction, the political challenges for India's government are no less daunting, with key issues including sporadic, serious flare-ups of communal tension between the Hindu and Muslim populations, and the serious deadlock between India and Pakistan over the disputed northern province of Kashmir, which has in the past brought these two nuclear-armed neighbors to the brink of extinction. In summary, I found India to be a fascinating country, a frustrating one, at times a bewitching one, and at times a bewildering one. Despite the monumental problems I've outlined, there is no denying the astonishing achievement of this country to integrate over 1 billion people of dozens of ethnicities, cultures, religions, and languages to function, albeit with some bumps, as the world's largest liberal democracy. India is truly a work in progress. It is enduring and dynamic, and with the talents of its people, which of course is India's most precious asset, it will hopefully be increasingly well prepared to meet the challenges of the modern world. Thank you very much. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information, but I hope it was, but India has a lot of things to know. It's an amazing place, an amazingly diverse place. Yes, sir?
What is India's population growth rate right now?
It's about 3%, way too high. Yeah, that's why it's slated within the next decade to become the world's most populous nation. Yes?
I was just wondering about the area. China has a very large area.
Right.
Mostly mountains. And India is really a lot smaller. If they overtake China population,
Life is going to get pretty tough.
where are they going?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, China is about the same size geographically as the United States, although there are a lot of mountainous areas, and the population of China is concentrated in a lot of the cities along the coast. India is about a little more than 1/3 the size of the United States, so it's considerably different in geographic area. An interesting fact is that although there are many cities in India that have enormous populations, places like Mumbai, which has some 16 million people, and Delhi and Kolkata, which have, Delhi I think has 12 million people, and Kolkata similar, and Chennai, another one. But even if you add up all those urban areas with the crush of people, still a full 75% of the people live in rural areas, which is a pretty amazing statistic.
But the buildings are vertical.
Well, they're actually, some of them are now, but many of them, their traditional development form has been to sprawl, to spread out. Mumbai is an enormous city. The very center of the city has high, tall buildings, but really it sprawls out. And getting from one end of the city to the other takes hours in traffic. Yes?
Because of the diversity between the North and the South, and their different beliefs, are there places which some won't go? I mean, is there any, do they have to be careful?
Yeah, the question is it dangerous? I guess you're asking, is it dangerous for certain people to go in certain areas? To be sure, it can be. Generally, it isn't, and there is mixing that goes on, but yes, there are certain places that not only is it dangerous because of religious differences, but also because of economic differences. And there are some places in West Bengal, for example, where it has been difficult for people to go because they were more likely to be attacked or robbed in those areas because of the intense poverty that's there. But generally speaking, I mean, it depends how you go. If you go if you're of a different religion and you go into an area with the idea that you're going to cast aspersions on that other religion or do things that try to show superiority, you're going to be asking for trouble. But normally, people can mix and go into the different areas. It's not like an armed camp where people are separate, but the neighborhoods are very ghettoized. People live in different, even within the city, people live, there are Hindu neighborhoods, there are Muslim neighborhoods. Yes?
Can India feed itself?
Can India feed itself? So far, it seems to be able to, so far. But I don't know if they, if they run into a famine situation, if something happens. It is amazing how they are able to take care of them. So they're 1.2 billion people. But I would think if weather patterns change, if something drastic and dreadful occurs, this could threaten their food supply.
As you said, 1/3 the area of the United States has got 4 times the population.
Yeah, well, they are very good with rice cultivation. They have a number of crops. Yes?
Your pictures showed almost no motorized traffic, but there must be some cities that have horrendous traffic jams.
Yeah, I think I had a few that show motorized traffic, although the rickshaws were more interesting photographically. But yes, there is severe traffic congestion. Part of the problem, the challenge of taking pictures of motorized situations is that I feared for my life, immersing myself in those scenes. But yes, of course, there is enormous amount of traffic congestion within the cities, and the traffic congestion is fighting with each other between the motorized and the non-motorized traffic, of which there is a lot. So you have all these hand-drawn rickshaws and bicycle-pedaled rickshaws and smaller vehicles that are competing for space in the road with big, large semi-trucks in the same road who come barreling down upon you while you're in one of these vehicles that somebody is tooting along at about 10 miles an hour, and they just blare you with their horn to get out of the way, because the way the right-of-way works in India is size matters. So it's the biggest one who takes control of the road, and you better get out of the way. And of course, if you're riding in one of these open, unprotected vehicles, and you're at the mercy of the driver who may want to challenge the truck at your penalty, rather than immediately getting out of the way of one of these trucks barreling down on you from behind.
What about Tokyo?
What about
Tokyo,
what about Tokyo? Yeah.
comparison?
Tokyo, I think is a larger. I think it's a larger metropolitan area. I'm pretty sure, because they don't have a lot of other cities that have quite as much population as. Also, they have a population growth rate that's like 1%, so or less than 1%. So they have sort of a handle on things. And also, Tokyo has a much different development pattern, where they have built very, very tall buildings. So they're very compact vertically, because they have a much better recognition of energy conservation, and they don't own a lot of cars. Space is a premium. It's much smaller. I mean, they really are small in terms of having space available. Yes?
You're on foot most of the time when you're taking the pictures, but how did you get from one area to the other?
I would travel on, you saw that bus with the people on the top? I was one of those people on the top of the bus. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's a good place to take a picture. And so I did that. I also traveled on the trains a lot, which was fine, and they ran reasonably well. They went everywhere. The train system built by the British is quite extensive, and you can get pretty much anywhere except in some mountainous areas like western India and Rajasthan. I traveled on the local buses, and then in the cities, of course, I traveled in the motorized rickshaws. There are really a very few places in India anymore. I think Calcutta is perhaps the only one where you can go in a person-carried rickshaw, where somebody's actually lifting you and carrying you along and running along. But in all the other cities, they have motorized rickshaws, which don't move a whole lot faster, but you feel better about it. Yes?
What kind of temperatures are we talking about?
Well, because the country spans a lot of climate zones, it has quite a lot of variation north to south, and it also has quite a lot of change in elevation. So, and it has seasons. So there's quite a lot of variation. I mean, there are places that get quite hot. Places in the mountains, like in Rajasthan, are very, very temperate, very mild. Places in the south of India are generally can get very, very warm during the summer, up in the high 80s and 90s. So, and they have, of course, monsoon seasons. They have rainy seasons with very, very high humidity, which vary from the north to the south. The monsoon season in one part of the country is different than the monsoon season in another part of the country, which means if you want to really get to know the country well, you need to travel there a few different times in different seasons. Yes?
Can you address the languages over there, and do you have to travel with a
Yeah, let me just turn this off. Yeah, there are actually 18, it's such a multilingual country. There are 18 officially recognized languages. 18 officially recognized languages by the Constitution. And in fact, and this I found amazing, in fact I found it so amazing that I brought a sample, which you can take a look at if you want. Their money, Indian money, has 14, every piece of Indian money has 14 different languages on it. Now that sounds amazing, doesn't it? But there's a line in 14 different languages, and most of these languages also have different scripts. They're not written in a Roman script, and they have each of them describing what that bill is in 14 different languages to cater to the many groups. And if you want, I'll pass that around. But in terms of my own getting around, generally speaking, among the more educated, middle class and upper class, English, thank goodness for those Brits. The English language is mostly spoken in India. And so by and large, especially along some of the places which were more tourist-oriented, traveler-oriented, some of the temples and those kinds of places, I would usually be able to get by in English. I did not study Hindi or any of the Indian languages for this trip. But when you are working with the lower educated population, say the people who drive the rickshaws, then it's a real problem because most of those people do not know any English whatsoever. And so when you go to any of these rickshaw drivers and you say, and you sort of motion or kind of give an indication in English that you want to go to a certain place, immediately they say, oh, of course, yeah, certainly, and they're like, so just get in. And then you can drive for like hours because they have no idea what you asked for, they have no idea where they're going. They just take you until you get incredibly frustrated and force them over to the side of the road and find somebody who speaks English, and they act as a translator, and then invariably you end up going clear on the other side of where you've already gone to find this place. So it varies. Yes?
Is it safe to buy any food, to eat the foods that you could buy in the bazaars? Is it safe to eat uncooked?
Yeah, the question is it safe to eat the foods? It is, with the caveat that you have to follow certain precautions, and that is fruits should be things that you can peel. You shouldn't have anything like fresh salads that would be washed with local water. If you have things that are hot, you should make sure that they're cooked throughout. And if you buy things from the street, you should make sure that you see them being cooked, that they haven't been lying around for a long time. And you might even try to make sure, by taking a good look, to make sure the oil that they're cooking it in is fresh. Now, that said, my feeling is that you really haven't seen India until you've gotten at least a little bit sick. Because if you're too careful, it means you haven't tried. And you really haven't explored or dipped. I know people who've been to India who take cans of tuna fish with them from the United States. And this seems like a real loss because Indian food is fabulous. So you just have to be careful and you can avoid. I did, in all my trips there, in the months that I've been there, I had a little stomach illness for about a day in one place because I mistakenly went with somebody who said he'll order for me, and I think he ordered some fresh salad of some sort, and I just thought it was clean enough, but I paid the price. You have to be vigilant without exception. Yes, in the back.
How is the healthcare system?
Yeah, a question about the healthcare system. Like the education system, and I answer this this way for many of the countries, developing countries that I visited, healthcare is very good. Education is very good. But those systems are the best in the largest cities, where you can provide for them, where people have the resources and the means to get to schools and to pay for schools where it's necessary. As you go down the line and you leave the Delhis and Mumbais of the world in India, and you get to the smaller villages, people don't have access to education or to good health facilities. The clinics have fewer and fewer specialized personnel, doctors and nurses, and people have less money, they're poorer, and many of the children, in terms of education, are needed to work in the fields rather than having their parents send them to schools. So there's a wide variation in the level of healthcare and education based on where you're living and your economic status and your caste within the country. Okay. One more question, yes?
What was your reaction to Slumdog Millionaire?
Slumdog Millionaire. Yeah, I thought it was a great film, but I didn't like it in a lot of ways because it reinforced a lot of stereotypes about India in terms of the things that we might think of India as having. A lot of crime and war and mafia type bosses. Sure, always and hopefully I can come back.